The night was dark and cold. The moon hid behind thick grey clouds. Captain Elias Thorne sat alone in the corner of the tavern. The room was filled with smoke and the smell of cheap ale. Sailors laughed and shouted at other tables, but Elias was quiet. He did not look at them. He looked at the wooden door. He was waiting for someone. Elias was a tall man with broad shoulders. His coat was blue and worn from many years at sea. A silver sword hung by his side. He took a sip from his mug. The drink was warm and bitter. He placed the mug back on the sticky table. Suddenly, the heavy wooden door opened. The wind from the outside blew the candles. The flames danced wildly. An old man walked into the tavern. He wore a dirty brown cloak. His face was full of deep lines, and his eyes were nervous. He looked left and right. Then, he saw the captain in the corner. The old man walked quickly across the room. He sat down opposite Elias. The chair made a scraping noise against the floor. "Did you bring it?" Elias asked in a low voice. His blue eyes were sharp and serious. The old man nodded slowly. His hands shook as he reached into his coat. "I have it, Captain," the old man whispered. "But you must be careful. Many people want this paper. They will kill for it." Elias leaned forward. The shadow of his hat covered his eyes. "I am not afraid of other men," Elias said calmly. "Show me." The old man pulled out a piece of parchment. It was very old and yellow. The edges were torn. He placed it on the table and smoothed it out with his rough hand. Elias looked down. It was a map. But it was not a complete map. It was only one piece. The black ink showed a coastline and strange symbols. In the center, there was a drawing of a crown. It was the legendary Sunken crown. "This is only the first part," the old man said. "The rest is hidden. You must find the other clues." Elias studied the drawing. He recognized the shape of the coast. It was far away, in deep waters. He felt a spark of excitement in his chest. He had searched for this for 10 years. "How much?" Elias asked. 50 gold coins, the old man said. "I need to leave this town tonight. It is not safe for me anymore." Elias reached into his pocket. He pulled out a heavy leather bag. He opened it and counted the heavy gold coins. He placed them on the table. The gold shone in the dim candlelight. The old man grabbed the money quickly. He stood up and pulled his hood over his head. "Good luck, Captain," the old man said. "Do not trust the sea. And do not trust the shadows." The old man turned and walked away. He disappeared out the door and into the night. Elias was alone again. He picked up the old map and folded it carefully. He put it inside his coat, next to his heart. He stood up and fixed his hat. It was time to go back to his ship. The adventure was beginning. Elias walked out of the noisy tavern and into the quiet street. The mist was thick near the water. He could smell the salt in the air. It was a familiar and comforting smell. He walked quickly towards the docks. His heavy boots hit the stone ground with a steady rhythm. The town was asleep. Only the sound of the ocean moving against the shore filled the night. At the end of the long wooden pier, a large ship waited. It was the Sea Hawk. The ship was big and painted black to hide in the dark. It looked like a sleeping beast in the moonlight. The tall masts reached up toward the sky. Elias loved this ship more than anything in the world. It was his home and his freedom. He walked up the wooden plank and stepped onto the main deck. The wood creaked under his feet, welcoming him back. A woman stood near the large wooden wheel. It was Sarah, his quartermaster. She was 40 years old and very tough. Her hair was grey and tied back tightly. She wore a red scarf around her neck and a long brown coat. She had a pistol on her belt and a knife in her boot. She did not smile often. She was a serious woman who knew the sea perfectly. "Welcome back, Captain," Sarah said. Her voice was calm and firm. "The men are sleeping below the deck. But I waited for you." Elias nodded his head. "Thank you, Sarah. We have much work to do." He walked to the edge of the ship and looked at the ropes. Some were old and thin. He ran his hand along the wooden rail. It felt rough. He looked up at the sails. They were folded, but he knew they had holes. The last voyage was very hard. The storms damaged the Sea Hawk badly. "The ship is tired," Sarah said, standing next to him. "We need new ropes. And we need to fix the hull. The wood is soft in some places. It is dangerous to sail like this." Elias turned to her. "Can we sail in 3 days?" he asked. Sarah crossed her strong arms. She thought for a moment. 3 days is not much time. We need supplies. We need salted meat and fresh water. And the crew is too small right now. We lost 3 men last month to the fever. Elias reached into his coat and touched the hidden map. "We will find new men," he said confidently. "And we will fix the ship. Look at this." He pulled out the yellow paper and showed it to her. Sarah took it carefully. She held it up to the light of a hanging lantern. Her eyes widened as she looked at the drawing. "The sunken crown," she whispered. "I heard stories about this treasure. My father told me about it long ago. He said it is impossible to find." "It is not impossible," Elias said. "It is only lost. And we found the first clue. If we find the crown, we will be rich. We can retire. No more storms. No more fighting." Sarah looked at the map again. Then she looked at the captain. She saw the fire and determination in his eyes. She handed the paper back to him. "I do not care about the gold," Sarah said. "But I like a challenge. And I follow you, Captain. Wherever the wind blows." Elias smiled. It was a rare smile. "Good. Wake the men at sunrise. We have a long list of tasks. We need to make the Sea Hawk strong again." Sarah nodded and walked away to her cabin. Elias stayed on the deck alone. He looked up at the stars through the clouds. The ship rocked gently on the black water. He felt ready. The Sea Hawk would fly again soon. The sun rose slowly over the harbor. The morning light was bright and yellow. It touched the water and made it sparkle. Captain Elias stood on the dock next to Sarah. They looked at the busy port town. People were everywhere. Sailors carried heavy wooden boxes. Merchants shouted prices for fish and fruit. The air smelled of tar and old rope. "We need 10 strong men," Elias said to Sarah. He adjusted his hat to block the sun. "And we need a new cook. The last one was terrible." Sarah nodded in agreement. "I will check the tavern," she said. "You check the market square. Remember, Captain, no beginners. We need experience." Elias walked to the center of the square. Many men sat on barrels or stood against walls. They were waiting for work. When they saw the captain's blue coat, they stood up straight. They knew he was hiring. A young man ran up to Elias. He had a smooth face and bright eyes. He looked eager. "Take me, Captain," the young man said. "I am fast. I can climb the mast quickly." Elias looked at the young man's soft hands. He shook his head slowly. "You are too young," Elias said firmly. "Go home to your mother. The sea is for grown men." The young man looked sad and walked away. Elias turned to a different man. This man was sitting quietly on a crate. He was large and bald. He had a long white scar across his cheek. His arms were thick like tree branches. "What is your name?" Elias asked. The big man stood up slowly. He was very tall. My name is Thomas, he said. His voice was deep and rough like stones rolling together. I sailed on the Black Star for 20 years. Elias looked at the man's hands. They were rough and covered in calluses. These were hands that worked hard. Can you handle a cannon? Elias asked. Thomas nodded. I can shoot a fly off a seagull's wing at 50 yards, he said without smiling. You are hired, Elias said. Go to the Sea Hawk at the end of the pier. Elias continued to walk through the crowd. He picked men who looked tough. He picked men with grey in their beards and salt in their hair. By noon, he had 9 new sailors. He needed one more person. He met Sarah back at the tavern. She was talking to a thin man with a wooden leg. The man wore a dirty apron. This is Silas, Sarah said. He wants to be our cook. Elias looked at the man. Can you cook? He asked. Silas smiled. He had missing teeth. I can make salt beef taste like steak, Silas said. And I make the best fish stew in the port. He has his own knives, Sarah added. And he does not drink too much rum. Elias looked at Silas. The man looked weak, but his eyes were smart. Welcome to the crew, Silas, Elias said. Do not poison us. The group walked back to the ship together. The new crew members carried their bags. They were a strange group of adults. Some were fat, some were thin. Some had scars, some had tattoos. But they all looked ready for work. Elias watched them walk up the plank onto the Sea Hawk. He felt a sense of pride. The ship was full again. The family was complete. Now, they could finally prepare to leave. The ocean was calling their names. The Sea Hawk was finally ready. The ship sat low in the water because it was heavy with supplies. The crew loaded many barrels of fresh water and boxes of dried meat. Silas, the new cook, carried bags of flour and potatoes into the kitchen. The deck was clean and scrubbed. Everything was in its proper place. Captain Elias stood at the helm on the upper deck. The large wooden wheel felt warm under his hands. He looked down at his crew. They were busy and focused. Sarah walked among them. She checked the ropes and the sails one last time. She wanted everything to be perfect. Are we ready? Elias called out. His voice was loud and carried over the wind. Sarah looked up and nodded. We are ready, Captain, she shouted back. The tide is high. The wind is blowing from the west. Elias took a deep breath. He smelled the salt and the freedom. Raise the anchor, he ordered. Let the sails fly. The men moved quickly. Thomas used his great strength to pull the heavy anchor chain. His muscles tensed as the wet iron came up from the deep water. Other sailors pulled the thick ropes on the masts. The white canvas sails dropped down. At first, they were loose. Then, the wind caught them. The sails filled with air and became tight and round. The ship groaned as it began to move. It pushed through the water slowly at first. Then it gained speed. The wooden hull cut through the small waves. White foam appeared on the sides of the ship. Elias turned the wheel slightly. He steered the ship away from the busy harbor. He guided it toward the open gap in the sea wall. The people on the docks waved goodbye. Elias did not wave back. He kept his eyes on the horizon. As they left the safety of the port, the ocean became bigger. The water changed from green to a deep, dark blue. The land behind them looked smaller and smaller. The houses became tiny dots. Soon, the land disappeared completely. There was only the sky and the sea. The crew settled into their jobs. Some men cleaned the deck. Others checked the cannons. Silas started a fire in the stove to make dinner. The ship felt alive. It rocked gently from side to side. Elias felt a calm feeling in his heart. On land, he felt heavy and worried. But here, on the open ocean, he felt light. The map was in his pocket. The crew was strong. The adventure was real. Sarah climbed up the stairs to stand next to him. She looked at the compass. "Course set for southeast," she said. "Keep her steady, Sarah," Elias said. "We have a long way to go. The sunken crown is waiting for us." The sun began to set. The sky turned orange and purple. The sea hawk sailed into the beautiful evening. The journey had truly begun. The first 2 days of the journey were easy and peaceful. The sun shone brightly on the calm water. The crew relaxed and told stories on the deck. But the sea is never safe for long. On the third afternoon, the weather changed very quickly. The blue sky turned a deep, angry gray. Thick clouds covered the sun like a heavy blanket. The air became cold and wet. Captain Elias stood at the wheel. He felt the wind change direction. It hit his face with force. He looked at the horizon. A dark wall of rain was moving towards them fast. The ocean turned black and restless. "Storm coming!" Elias shouted loudly. "Prepare the ship." Sarah ran to the main deck. She looked at the sails. They were full of wind, pulling the ship too hard. "Lower the sails," she ordered the men. "Hurry, or the wind will tear them apart." The crew jumped into action. They did not smile anymore. Thomas and the other sailors grabbed the thick ropes. The wind was very strong now. It pushed against the canvas sails. The men pulled hard, their muscles straining. The rain began to fall. It was not a gentle rain. It was a heavy, cold downpour. It hit the wooden deck with great noise. The ship began to rock violently. It went up high on a big wave, then crashed down into the valley of water. Water splashed over the sides of the ship. The deck became slippery and dangerous. "Hold on!" Sarah yelled. She grabbed a rope to stay standing. A sailor slipped and fell on the wet wood. 2 other men helped him stand up quickly. They tied themselves to the railings with ropes so they would not fall into the sea. Elias fought with the wheel. The ocean tried to turn the ship sideways. If the ship turned sideways, a wave could flip it over. Elias used all his strength to keep the sea hawk straight. His coat was soaked with rain. His hat flew off his head and disappeared into the wind, but he did not care. He only cared about his ship and his crew. Lightning flashed in the sky. It lit up the dark clouds for a second. Then, a loud thunder rolled across the ocean. It shook the bones of every man on board. The noise was deafening. "The wind is too strong." Thomas shouted over the noise. "We cannot secure the mainsail." The large white sail flapped wildly in the wind. It sounded like a giant whip. Elias watched with worry. The mast bent under the pressure. The wood groaned in pain. "Cut the rope," Elias ordered. "Let it loose." It was a dangerous choice, but necessary. If they did not release the tension, the mast would break. The storm was winning. The night fell, but it was not silent. The wind howled and the sea roared. The crew huddled together, wet and cold, waiting for the morning. The storm raged for many long hours. The darkness was absolute. Only the white foam of the waves provided any light. Elias stood at the wheel without rest. His arms ached from fighting the ocean. The cold water soaked through his coat and chilled his skin. He did not leave his post. The crew huddled near the cabins. They held onto the rails and prayed for the sun to rise. Suddenly, a sharp noise cut through the roar of the wind. It sounded like a gunshot, but much louder. It was the sound of dying wood. Elias looked up quickly. The main mast, the tallest pillar of the ship, bent at an unnatural angle. "The mast is breaking," Thomas yelled from the deck. Before anyone could move, the wood snapped. The top half of the heavy mast fell. It crashed onto the deck with a massive impact. Splinters of wood flew everywhere. Ropes whipped through the air like angry snakes. A heavy pulley smashed into the railing. The ship tipped to the side from the sudden weight. "Cut the lines," Sarah commanded. She grabbed a heavy axe. She hacked at the tangled ropes. Thomas and the other men helped her. They had to clear the mess before it dragged the ship down. They worked desperately in the pouring rain. Finally, the broken piece slid into the ocean and floated away. The ship righted itself. Morning arrived slowly. The grey clouds broke apart. The angry sea turned into gentle swells. The sun poked through the sky. The Sea Hawk floated on the calm water, but she looked broken. The mainsail was gone. The deck was littered with debris and broken wood. Elias walked down the stairs to the main deck. He inspected the damage. The base of the mast was cracked. It could not hold a large sail anymore. "Report," he said to Sarah. Sarah looked tired. Her hair was messy and her clothes were wet. "We are alive, Captain," she said. "But we are crippled. We have only the small front sail. Our speed is gone. It will take weeks to reach the destination at this pace." Elias looked at the tired crew. They sat on the floor, drinking water and eating dry biscuits. They needed rest, but the ship needed repairs first. "We cannot continue like this," Elias said. "We need fresh wood to build a new mast. Is there land nearby?" Sarah checked her charts. She traced a line with her finger. "Yes," she said. "About 50 miles to the west. There is a small island. Sailors call it Turtle Island. It has forests." "Then that is our destination," Elias decided. "Steer the ship towards the island. We will limp there if we have to." The ship moved forward slowly. It felt heavy and sluggish. The excitement of the departure was gone. Now, it was a struggle for survival. Elias touched the map in his pocket. The treasure felt very far away. The Sea Hawk moved very slowly through the calm blue water. It took 2 long days to reach the location on the chart. The crew was impatient and tired. The sun beat down on the broken deck. Without the mainsail, the ship felt dead in the water. Elias stood at the front of the ship. He held his brass spyglass to his eye. He scanned the horizon for hours. Finally, he saw a shape in the distance. It was green and round. A high hill sat in the middle of the land. It looked exactly like the shell of a giant turtle swimming in the sea. "Land ho!" Elias shouted to his crew. "Turtle Island is ahead." The men cheered weakly. They were happy to see dry land. They navigated the ship carefully into a small bay. The water here was shallow and clear. The color changed from deep blue to bright turquoise. They could see colorful fish swimming near the white sand at the bottom. "Drop the anchor," Sarah ordered. The heavy iron anchor splashed into the water. The chain rattled as it went down. The ship stopped moving and settled into the calm bay. "We need a team for the beach," Elias said. He looked at his men. "Thomas, bring your axe. We need a tall, straight tree for the new mast. Sarah, take 2 men and look for fresh water. The rest of you, stay here and clean the deck." They lowered a small wooden boat into the water. Elias, Sarah, Thomas, and 3 other sailors climbed in. They rowed towards the shore. The oars hit the water in a steady rhythm. The beach was beautiful. The sand was white and powdery. Tall palm trees lined the edge of the forest. Coconuts hung high in the branches. The small boat hit the sand. The men jumped out and pulled the boat up the beach. The ground felt solid under their boots. It was a relief after days on the rocking ship. The air smelled sweet, like flowers and damp earth. "Be careful," Elias warned them. "We do not know what is on this island. Stay together." He placed his hand on the hilt of his sword. They walked into the thick forest. The sunlight came through the leaves in beams. It was hot and humid. Birds with bright red and yellow feathers flew between the trees. They called out to each other. Thomas stopped in front of a tall pine tree. He looked up at it. It was very straight and thick. "This is a good tree, Captain," Thomas said. He knocked on the wood. It sounded solid. "It will make a strong mast." "Good," Elias said. "Cut it down and clean the branches. Then we will drag it to the beach." Sarah walked further into the jungle. She listened for the sound of water. Soon, she found a small stream. The water flowed over smooth rocks. She knelt down and tasted it. It was cold and fresh. "Over here," she called out. "We have water." The crew began their work. The sound of Thomas's axe hitting the tree echoed through the quiet forest. Elias stood guard. He watched the trees and the shadows. He felt a strange feeling. He felt like someone was watching them. The sound of Thomas chopping the tree echoed through the forest. It was a steady rhythm. Elias walked away from the group to check the surrounding area. He wanted to make sure they were safe. The jungle was thick and green. Ferns brushed against his boots. He walked towards a high wall of grey rock near the edge of the forest. Thick vines hung down from the top of the cliff like heavy curtains. They covered the stone completely. Elias saw a dark shadow behind the leaves. He was curious. He pulled out his sword. The sharp steel blade shone in the sunlight. He swung the sword and cut the thick plants. The vines fell to the ground. Behind the green curtain, there was a hole in the rock. It was the entrance to a cave. The hole was tall enough for a man to walk through. Elias stepped closer. The air coming from inside was cool and smelled of dry earth. It was very different from the hot, humid air of the jungle. Elias stepped inside the cave. It was dark, but a beam of sunlight came in through a crack in the ceiling. The light hit the back wall of the cave. Elias walked towards the light. He squinted his eyes to see better. He saw deep scratches on the stone surface. They were not natural marks. Someone made them with a knife or a chisel. He moved closer and touched the cold rock. The scratches were drawings. He saw a picture of a ship. He saw a picture of a large compass pointing east. And below that, he saw a shape that looked exactly like a crown. It was the Sunken crown. Elias felt a shock in his chest. He reached into his pocket with a shaking hand. He pulled out the old parchment map. He unfolded it and held it next to the wall. The symbols on the paper matched the symbols on the rock perfectly. "This is not a coincidence," Elias whispered to himself. "Someone was here before us. Someone with the map." He looked at the wall again. Under the crown, there was an arrow. It pointed towards a drawing of a skull. The skull had two crossed swords beneath it. Elias knew this symbol well. It was the symbol of Dead Man's Port. "Sarah!" Elias shouted loudly. His voice bounced off the cave walls. "Come here. Quickly!" A minute later, Sarah ran into the cave. She had her pistol in her hand. She looked worried. "What is it, Captain? Is there danger?" Elias pointed at the wall. Sarah looked at the carvings. She lowered her gun. Her eyes went wide. "The map," she said. "It matches the map." "Yes," Elias said. "The previous owner of the map stopped here. He left a message. The next clue is not in the ocean. It is in Dead Man's Port. Sarah looked at the drawing of the skull. That is a dangerous place, Elias, she said seriously. Thieves and murderers run that town. If we go there, we will find trouble. Elias folded his map and put it back in his pocket. We are pirates, Sarah, he said with a small smile. Trouble is our business. He looked at the cave entrance. Finish the work on the mast, he ordered. We leave as soon as the ship is fixed. We have a new destination. The sun began to go down behind the trees. The sky turned a soft pink and orange color. The crew was tired but satisfied with their work. The new mast lay on the white sand. It was stripped of all its branches and bark. It was smooth and ready. Thomas wiped the sweat from his forehead with a dirty cloth. It is a good piece of wood, he said proudly to the captain. It will hold against the strongest wind. Elias stood on the beach with his arms crossed. He looked out at the open ocean. He scanned the horizon one last time before the evening came. Suddenly, his eyes narrowed. He saw a small white shape in the distance. He frowned and lifted his spyglass quickly. The glass lens magnified the image. The shape grew larger and clearer. It was a ship. It was very different from the Sea Hawk. It had tall, clean white sails. The wood was polished and shiny. It moved fast and straight through the water. Elias saw the flag flying from the top mast. It was blue, white, and red. Navy. Elias hissed through his teeth. Royal Navy. The crew stopped working immediately. The laughter died in their throats. Their faces turned pale. The Royal Navy hunted pirates without mercy. If the soldiers found the Sea Hawk here, they would hang every man on the beach. Do they see us? Sarah asked. Her voice was tight with worry. She checked her pistol automatically. Not yet, Elias said quickly. The sun is behind us, so we are in the shadow. But they are coming this way. They are patrolling the coast. We must hide the ship. Now. But Captain, the mast is broken. Thomas said. We cannot sail away. We do not need to sail, Elias ordered sharply. We need to hide. Pull up the anchor quietly. Do not let the chain rattle. Use the small boat to tow the Sea Hawk behind those tall rocks. He pointed to a high cliff at the edge of the bay. If we stay behind the rocks, they will not see our hull. The men moved with desperation. They forgot their tiredness. They pushed the small boat back into the water. They rowed hard to the ship. They climbed onto the deck silently. They pulled the heavy wet anchor up slowly. They were very careful not to make any noise. The Sea Hawk began to drift loose in the water. The current pushed it slowly. The men in the small boat tied a rope to the front of the ship. They rowed with all their strength to pull the heavy beast. It was exhausting work. The Navy ship came closer and closer. It looked like a giant predator looking for food. Elias watched from the deck. He held his breath. Faster, he whispered to the wind. Faster. The Sea Hawk slipped behind the tall grey rocks just in time. The Navy ship sailed past the opening of the bay. It did not turn in. It continued along the coast. The white sails passed by and disappeared behind the cliff. The crew let out a long breath. They stood in the dark shadow of the rocks. They were safe for now. That was close, Sarah whispered. She wiped her shaking hands on her coat. Too close, Elias agreed. His face was grim. We cannot stay here. We must fix the mast tonight. We work in the dark. And we leave before the sun rises. The night was long and full of tension. The moon hid behind the clouds, so the bay was very dark. The crew of the Sea Hawk worked in absolute silence. They could not use hammers to fix the wood because the loud noise travels far over the water. If the Navy ship heard them, it would be the end. Instead, they used thick ropes to tie the new mast to the base of the old one. It was a difficult task. Thomas used his great strength to lift the heavy pine log. Sweat ran down his face and into his eyes. He did not complain. Other sailors pulled on the pulleys to help him. The heavy wood rose up slowly into the air. It stood tall and straight against the starry sky. Sarah directed the men with hand signals. No one spoke a word. They were all afraid. Elias stood at the rail of the ship. He watched the entrance of the bay. He listened to the wind. Every shadow on the water looked like an enemy ship. He felt his heart beat fast in his chest. He checked his pocket watch in the moonlight. It was almost morning. The sky in the east was starting to turn a light gray color. "Hurry," he whispered to himself. "The sun is coming." Finally, the mast was secure. It was not as strong as the original mast, but it would hold a sail. The men attached the canvas sheet quickly. They were exhausted. Their hands were blistered and raw from the rough ropes. But they did not stop working. "Prepare to leave," Elias whispered to Sarah. "The tide is turning. We must ride the current out." They raised the anchor very slowly. Inch by inch, the heavy wet iron came up from the deep. They were careful not to let it hit the side of the ship. The chain made a soft noise, but the wind covered it. The Sea Hawk began to drift out from behind the tall rocks. The wind caught the new sail. The canvas filled with air. The ship moved forward. It picked up speed. They sailed out of the quiet bay and into the open sea. The water was rougher here. The waves hit the bow of the ship gently. Elias looked back at Turtle Island. The beach was empty. The forest was silent. There was no sign of the Navy ship. They had escaped unseen. A feeling of relief washed over the crew. Some men sat down on the deck and closed their eyes. They were safe. "That was good work," Elias said to Sarah. "The men did well." Sarah nodded. She looked at the new mast. "It will hold," she said. "But we need to be careful. No more storms." Elias looked at the horizon. The sun began to rise. The ocean turned gold. "Set a course for northeast," Elias ordered. "To Dead Man's Port. We have a meeting with the past." The Sea Hawk sailed smoothly away from Turtle Island. The wind was gentle on the new mast. The ocean was calm and blue. Captain Elias sat in his private cabin at the back of the ship. It was a small room with dark wooden walls. A large table stood in the center. It was covered with charts, compasses, and old books. A single lantern hung from the ceiling. It swung back and forth with the slow movement of the ship. Elias held a piece of paper in his hands. Before they left the cave, he had drawn the symbols from the stone wall. He studied the drawing carefully. The ink was black and sharp. He looked at the drawing of the skull. It was not a normal pirate symbol. This skull had a distinct crack on the forehead, and the crossed swords beneath it were broken. Sarah knocked on the heavy door and walked in. She carried 2 mugs of hot coffee. She placed one in front of Elias. Steam rose from the dark liquid. "You have been staring at that paper for 3 hours," she said. "Your coffee is getting cold." Elias took a sip of the hot drink. It was strong and woke him up. "I remember this symbol," he said slowly to Sarah. "It belongs to an old pirate lord. His name was Redbeard. He died 20 years ago, but his ship sank near a specific town." Sarah looked at the paper. She frowned deeply. "The symbol points to Dead Man's Port," she said quietly. "I know that mark." "Yes," Elias replied. "The cave told us to go there. Look at this." He pointed to the bottom of the paper. There were small numbers written under the broken swords. These are not just coordinates for the town. They point to a specific building in the port. The Black Anchor Tavern. Sarah crossed her arms. She looked worried. Dead Man's Port is a terrible place, Elias, she said. There is no law there. The Royal Navy does not go there. Only thieves, murderers, and desperate men live in that town. If we go there, we are walking into danger. I know, Elias said calmly. But we have no choice. The map in the cave is clear. We need to find a man named Blind Pete. He was Redbeard's quartermaster. If anyone knows where the second piece of the map is, it is him. Blind Pete? Sarah asked. I heard stories about him. People say he is crazy. They say he talks to ghosts. Elias stood up and walked to the small round window. He looked out at the endless horizon. We need his help, Elias said. Crazy or not. He holds the key to the sunken crown. He turned back to Sarah. His face was serious. Tell the crew to sharpen their swords, he ordered. And tell them to clean their pistols. We arrive at Dead Man's Port tomorrow afternoon. We must be ready for a fight. Sarah nodded. She understood the danger. I will tell them, she said. She left the cabin and closed the door softly. Elias was alone again. He looked at the paper one last time. He folded it and put it in his pocket. He felt a cold shiver down his back. He knew that Dead Man's Port was a trap, but he was ready to step into it. The Sea Hawk arrived at its destination in the late afternoon. The sun did not shine here. A thick, grey fog hung low over the water. It covered the tops of the buildings and made the air feel wet and heavy. The water in the harbour was not blue like the open ocean. It was brown and dirty. Dead fish floated on the surface. The smell of rotten wood and old rum filled the air. This place smells like death, Sarah said. She stood next to Elias at the wheel. She covered her nose with her scarf. Elias nodded. His eyes scanned the other ships in the port. There were many vessels. Some were large and dark. Some were broken and abandoned. None of them flew a country's flag. They all flew black flags or no flags at all. This was a haven for criminals. Lower the anchor, Elias ordered quietly. But keep the cannons ready. We do not know who is watching us. The crew worked silently. They were nervous. They saw the people on the docks. Men with dirty clothes and angry faces stood by the water. They watched the Sea Hawk arrive. They did not wave or smile. They stared like hungry wolves looking at a wounded deer. The ship stopped next to a long wooden pier. The wood looked old and weak. Thomas jumped down and tied the ropes. The ship groaned against the dock. Elias gathered his crew on the main deck. Listen to me, he said. His voice was low and serious. This is not a normal town. There are no laws here. If you start a fight, you must finish it. Do not show your gold. Do not trust anyone. The men nodded. They understood. They checked their knives and pistols. Sarah, Thomas, and Silas, you come with me, Elias said. We are going to the Black Anchor Tavern. The rest of you, stay on the ship. Guard it with your lives. If anyone tries to board, throw them into the sea. Elias stepped onto the wooden dock. The boards creaked under his heavy boots. He adjusted his blue coat. He made sure his sword was loose in its scabbard. The four of them walked down the long pier toward the town. The streets were narrow and muddy. The buildings were tall and made of dark stone and wood. Windows were broken. Voices came from the shadows. Drunken laughter mixed with angry shouting. A man lay sleeping in the mud, holding an empty bottle. A dog barked at them from an alleyway. Elias walked with confidence. He looked straight ahead. He knew that in a place like this, fear was a weakness. If you looked afraid, you became a victim. "The tavern is ahead," Elias whispered to Sarah. "I see the sign." Above a dark door, a wooden sign hung from a rusty chain. It was painted with a picture of a black anchor. The paint was peeling. The windows were dirty. This was the place. The next clue was inside. But Elias had a bad feeling. The hair on his arms stood up. He felt like he was walking into a trap. Elias pushed the heavy wooden door open with his hand. The inside of the black anchor was crowded and hot. The air was thick with smoke from pipes and old candles. The smell of stale beer and sweat was very strong. Elias walked into the room slowly. He tried to look calm, but his hand was near his sword. Sarah and Thomas followed him closely. Silas stayed near the door to watch the exit. The tavern was full of dangerous men. Pirates sat at round tables. They played cards and drank rum from dirty mugs. They looked at Elias with suspicion. The room became quiet for a moment as the strangers walked in. Then, the noise returned. Elias walked to the bar. A large man with a dirty apron was cleaning a glass. "I am looking for Blind Pete," Elias said quietly. He placed a silver coin on the counter. The barman looked at the coin. Then he looked at Elias. He pointed a fat finger towards a dark corner at the back of the room. "He is over there," the barman grunted. "But he is not alone today." Elias turned around. He looked at the dark corner. A single candle burned on the table. An old man sat there. His eyes were white and blind. He was shaking. But across from him sat another man. This man was leaning back in his chair. He wore a long, expensive black coat with silver buttons. His boots were polished. He held a glass of fine wine. Elias felt his blood turn cold. He knew that man. It was Captain Vane. Vane was a cruel man. He was known for killing prisoners and burning ships. He had a sharp face and long black hair. He looked up and saw Elias. A cold smile spread across his face. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a wolf seeing a sheep. "Elias Thorne," Vane said. His voice was smooth and dangerous. "I did not expect to see you here." Elias walked to the table. He did not sit down. He stood tall. "Vane," Elias said. "What are you doing here?" Vane laughed softly. He took a sip of his wine. "The same thing as you, old friend," Vane said. "I am looking for a lost treasure. The sunken crown." Sarah stepped forward. Her hand was on her pistol. Vane looked at her and laughed again. "Relax, my dear," Vane said. "We are just talking." Elias looked at Blind Pete. The old man was terrified. "Did he tell you where the map is?" Elias asked Vane. "He told me enough," Vane said. He stood up slowly. He was taller than Elias. "He told me you have the first piece of the map. And I want it." The room became very quiet. The other pirates stopped drinking. They watched the two captains. They sensed a fight was coming. "I will not give it to you," Elias said firmly. "The map is mine." Vane's smile disappeared. His eyes became hard like ice. "Then I will take it from your dead body," Vane whispered. "My ship, the Iron Wolf, is outside. My men are everywhere. You cannot escape." Elias looked around the room. Several men at other tables stood up. They pulled out knives and swords. They were Vane's crew. Elias realized it was a trap. They were surrounded. The silence in the tavern did not last long. Captain Vane lifted his hand slowly. This was the signal. 5 men pulled out their swords. They moved toward Elias and his friends. The other customers in the bar ran to the walls to watch. "Get them," Vane shouted. His voice was full of anger. "Do not let them leave." Elias was fast. He pulled his silver sword from his belt. The metal shone in the candlelight. A pirate swung a heavy knife at Elias. Elias blocked the hit. The steel blades clashed with a loud ringing noise. Sparks flew into the air. Elias pushed the man back and kicked him in the chest. The pirate fell onto a table. Sarah did not wait. She pulled her pistol from her belt. She aimed at the closest man. She pulled the trigger. A loud gunshot echoed in the small room. A cloud of grey smoke filled the air. One of Vane's men shouted in pain and fell to the ground holding his leg. Thomas used his great strength. He did not have a sword. He grabbed a heavy wooden chair. He threw it at two pirates. The chair broke into pieces. The men fell backward over a barrel. "Move!" Thomas yelled. "Go to the door." "We must leave." Elias yelled. "There are too many of them." He kicked a table over to block the path. Vane stood at the back and laughed. He did not fight. He let his men do the dirty work. Silas opened the heavy door. "Run!" Silas shouted. They ran out of the tavern and into the muddy street. The cool night air hit their faces. It was raining again. The ground was slippery and wet. They heard footsteps behind them. Vane's men were chasing them. "Stop them!" a voice shouted from the dark. More men appeared from the alleyways. It was an ambush. A man jumped from a shadow. He tried to grab Sarah. Sarah was quick. She hit him in the face with the handle of her pistol. The man fell into the mud. Elias stayed at the back of the group. He swung his sword to keep the enemies away. He was a wall of steel. No one could pass him. "To the docks!" Elias ordered. "Do not stop running." They ran past the dark houses. Dogs barked loudly at the noise. The mud splashed on their clothes. Their chests hurt from breathing hard. The boots felt heavy, but they did not slow down. Elias looked over his shoulder. 10 men were chasing them. They held torches. The firelight danced on the wet walls. It looked like a river of fire coming for them. "Almost there!" Thomas shouted. He pointed ahead. Elias could see the masts of the Sea Hawk rising above the buildings. The ship was their only hope. They needed to reach the water before Vane's men caught them. The wooden planks of the pier were slippery under their feet. The rain fell harder now. It made the wood very slick. Thomas almost fell, but he kept his balance. They ran fast toward the dark shape of the Sea Hawk. "Start the ship!" Elias screamed. His voice carried over the wind. "Raise the anchor now!" The crew on the Sea Hawk saw them running. They saw the torches of the angry mob behind them. They knew trouble was coming. The sailors on deck moved quickly. They did not ask questions. They pulled the ropes to raise the sails. "Jump!" Sarah shouted. She leaped from the dock. She flew through the air and landed hard on the deck of the ship. She rolled to absorb the impact. She stood up quickly and pulled out her pistol. Thomas and Silas jumped next. They landed safely. But Elias was the last one. He stood at the edge of the dock. He looked back. The enemy pirates were only a few meters away. Their faces were twisted with anger. The Sea Hawk began to move away from the pier. The gap between the wood and the ship grew wider. The water churned below. It was a dangerous jump. Elias took a deep breath. He ran 3 steps and pushed off the ground. He flew over the black water. His hands grabbed the wooden railing. His feet dangled over the sea. For a second, he thought he would fall. Then, a strong hand grabbed his coat. It was Thomas. The big man pulled the captain up onto the deck effortlessly. "Cut the ropes," Elias ordered immediately. He did not wait to untie the knots. He used his sword. He sliced the thick hemp rope in one motion. The rope fell into the water. The ship was free. The wind caught the sails. The canvas filled with air. The ship lurched forward. It moved away from the dock quickly. Vane's men reached the end of the pier. They waved their swords and shouted in anger. But they could not reach the ship. The dark water was too wide now. One man tried to jump, but he missed. He fell into the cold harbor water with a splash. Elias stood up and sheathed his sword. He breathed heavily. His heart beat against his ribs. He looked at the dock. He saw Captain Vane walking through the crowd of his men. Vane stood at the edge of the pier. He did not look angry. He looked calm. He pointed at Elias. Then he pointed at his own ship, the Iron Wolf. The Iron Wolf was nearby. Lanterns were lighting up on its deck. Sailors were running up its masts. Vane was preparing to follow them. Full sail. Elias shouted to his crew, "Get us out of this harbor. We need open water." Sarah stood next to him. She looked back at the town. "They will follow us, Captain," she said. "The Iron Wolf is a fast ship." "I know," Elias said grimly. "The chase has begun." The Sea Hawk sailed fast into the dark night. The lights of Dead Man's Port faded behind them. Soon, the town was just a small glow on the horizon. The ocean was black and empty. The only light came from the moon and the stars. Captain Elias stood at the wheel. He steered the ship away from the coast. He looked calm on the outside, but inside, his mind was racing. He was very angry. How did he know? Elias whispered to himself. Vane knew we were coming. He was waiting for us at that specific tavern. He knew about the map. Elias looked at his crew on the deck below. They were checking the ropes and securing the cannons. They looked tired from the run. Elias looked at Sarah. She was studying a chart near the lantern. He trusted Sarah with his life. He looked at Thomas. The big man was drinking water from a barrel. He trusted Thomas too. But there were new men on the ship. He hired them only a week ago. He did not know their history. One of them was a traitor. "Sarah," Elias called softly. She walked up the stairs to him. "Take the wheel. I need to walk around." Sarah saw the dark look in his eyes. "What is wrong, Captain?" she asked. "We have a leak," Elias said coldly. "Someone on this ship told Vane where we were going. We have a spy." Sarah's face went pale. A spy on a pirate ship was a very dangerous thing. It meant death for everyone. "Are you sure?" she asked. Vane was too prepared, Elias replied. He did not guess. He knew. Keep the ship steady, and watch the horizon for the Iron Wolf. Elias walked down to the main deck. He walked slowly. He looked at every man. He looked for nervous eyes. He looked for shaking hands. The men nodded to him with respect, but Elias did not smile back. He felt suspicious of everyone. He walked past the small kitchen. The door was open. A smell of soup came from inside. Silas, the new cook, was there. He was cutting potatoes with a large knife. He was humming a quiet song. When he saw the captain, he stopped. He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. He looked sweaty and nervous. "Good evening, Captain," Silas said. His voice shook a little. "Do you want some soup?" "No," Elias said. He stared at the cook. "Just do your job, Silas." Elias walked away, but he did not go far. He hid in the shadow of the stairs. He watched the kitchen door. After a few minutes, Silas looked out. He looked left and right to see if anyone was watching. Then, he reached into a bag of flour. He pulled out a small, round object. It shone in the lantern light. It was a small mirror. Elias felt a fire in his chest. A mirror was a tool for signaling. Sailors used it to flash light to other ships. Why did a cook have a signal mirror? Elias did not arrest him yet. He needed proof. He needed to catch the spy sending a message. He walked back to the upper deck. The ocean was silent. But the danger was not in the water. The danger was right here, on his own ship. The morning sun rose bright and yellow over the calm sea. It was a beautiful day, but the mood on the Sea Hawk was tense. Captain Elias did not sleep that night. He watched the horizon with his spyglass. He looked for the white sails of the Iron Wolf. But the ocean was empty for now. Elias kept one eye on the kitchen door. Around noon, the door opened. Silas, the cook, walked out. He carried a bucket of vegetable peels. He looked casual, like he was going to throw the trash into the sea. But Elias saw his eyes darting around. Silas walked to the back of the ship. He checked to see if anyone was looking. The crew was busy at the front of the ship repairing a sail. Silas thought he was alone. He put the bucket down. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small round mirror. He held the mirror up to the sun. He tilted it carefully. A beam of bright light shot out across the water. He flashed the light once, then twice, then 3 times. It was a code. He was signaling someone behind them, far beyond the curve of the earth. Now! Elias shouted. Sarah jumped from her hiding spot behind a barrel. She ran fast across the deck. Silas turned around in panic. His eyes were wide with fear. He tried to throw the mirror into the ocean. But Sarah was faster. She grabbed his wrist tightly. The mirror fell from his hand. It hit the wooden deck and shattered into many small pieces. Elias walked over slowly. His face was hard like stone. He looked down at the shaking man. "So," Elias said coldly, "it is you." Silas fell to his knees. He began to cry. "Please, Captain," he begged. "Do not kill me." "Why?" Elias asked. "Why did you betray us?" Silas looked at the broken glass on the floor. "Money," he whispered. "Captain Vane gave me 50 gold coins. And he promised me 50 more when he gets the map. I am a poor man, Captain. I have debts." "You sold your shipmates for gold," Sarah said with disgust. She spat on the deck near his feet. "You are filth." Elias looked at the horizon where Silas had pointed the light. "Is Vane close?" Elias asked. Silas nodded weakly. "He is 10 miles behind. He follows my signals. He knows your course." Elias felt a strong anger. He wanted to throw the traitor into the sea. But he stopped himself. "We might need him," Elias thought. "He knows Vane's plans." "Take him away," Elias ordered Thomas, who had just arrived. "Put him in the brig. Lock the door. And give him no food. Only water." Thomas grabbed Silas by the back of his shirt. He lifted the small man effortlessly. Silas cried and kicked. But it was useless. Thomas dragged him down the stairs to the dark cells at the bottom of the ship. Elias looked at Sarah. "Change course," he said. "Turn north immediately. If Vane is following the signal, we must go where the signal did not point." Sarah nodded and ran to the wheel. Elias looked at the broken mirror on the deck. He kicked the pieces into the sea. The spy was caught, but the enemy was still out there, hunting them. The Sea Hawk sailed north for one day. Then, The wind simply vanished. It did not slow down gradually. It stopped completely. The ocean became flat and smooth like a giant mirror. There were no waves. There was no sound of water hitting the hull. The ship sat perfectly still in the middle of the endless blue. For the first day, the crew was happy to rest. They worked hard escaping from Dead Man's Port. They enjoyed the quiet. But by the second day, the silence became heavy. The sun beat down on the ship with terrible force. The air was hot and thick. The wooden deck became so hot that the men could not walk on it without boots. Captain Elias stood at the wheel. It was useless to steer. The ship did not move. He looked at the white sails. They hung limp and lifeless from the masts. They looked like dead birds. Elias took off his heavy blue coat. His white shirt stuck to his skin with sweat. He wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. Any sign of wind? Elias asked Sarah. His voice sounded loud in the quiet air. Sarah shook her head. She looked tired. Her face was red from the sun. "Nothing, Captain," she said. "The barometer is not moving. The air is stagnant. We are stuck here." The crew sat in the shadows of the sails. They did not talk. They did not play cards. It was too hot to move. Thomas sat near the railing. He stared at the water. He looked like a statue. "Water is getting low," Sarah whispered to Elias. "We have enough for 2 weeks if we are careful. But in this heat, the men are thirsty. They want to drink more." "Ration it," Elias ordered. 2 cups per man per day. No more. We do not know how long this calm will last. It could be days. It could be weeks." Sarah nodded. She walked to the water barrel. She stood guard with a ladle. The men looked at the water with longing eyes. But they did not argue. They respected Sarah, and they knew the rules of the sea. Down below in the brig, it was even worse. The air in the cells was hot and stale. Silas shouted for water every hour. His voice was weak and scratchy. "Water," he cried. "Please, just a drop." Elias heard him through the floorboards. He did not feel pity. Silas put them in this danger. If the wind did not return, Vane might catch them using oars. Or they might die of thirst. The sun began to set on the 3rd day. The sky turned a bloody red. The ocean looked like liquid gold. It was beautiful, but it was also terrifying. A ship without wind is a floating coffin. Elias looked at the horizon. There was nothing there. No clouds. No birds. No ships. Just the empty, silent line where the sky met the sea. He prayed for a storm. He prayed for rain. He prayed for anything to break the silence. The heat on the 4th day was worse than before. The sun was a white ball of fire in the sky. The wood of the deck was burning hot. The men lay in the shadows, too tired to move. Their lips were dry and cracked. The air was so still that the flag did not even flutter. One sailor, a man named Jack, stood up. He wiped the sweat from his face. He looked at the cool blue water below. It looked so inviting. "I cannot take it anymore," Jack said. His voice was dry. "I need to cool down." "Do not do it," Thomas warned him from his spot in the shade. "The ocean is deep and hungry. It is not safe." Jack did not listen. He was desperate. He took off his boots and his shirt. He climbed the railing and jumped. He hit the water with a heavy splash. The cool water felt amazing on his hot skin. He came up laughing. "It is wonderful." Jack shouted, "Come in, boys. The water is perfect." Captain Elias walked to the railing. He looked down at the man. He was angry. "Get back on the ship, Jack," Elias ordered sternly. We are not on a holiday. Climb up the net now." Suddenly, Sarah pointed a shaking finger at the water. Her eyes were wide. "Captain," she yelled. "Look. Over there." Elias looked where she pointed. About 50 meters away, a dark gray triangle cut through the surface of the water. It was a dorsal fin. It was moving smoothly and quietly. It was heading straight for Jack. "Shark!" Elias roared. "Jack! Get out of the water! Now!" Jack stopped laughing. He turned and saw the fin. His face turned white with terror. He began to swim back to the ship. He swam wildly, splashing water everywhere. But the shark was faster. The gray shape moved like a torpedo toward the splashing noise. "Throw the ropes!" Sarah shouted to the crew. Thomas grabbed a heavy coil of rope. He threw it over the side with great accuracy. It landed near Jack. "Grab it!" Thomas yelled. "Do not let go!" Jack reached out his desperate hand. His fingers closed around the rough rope. "Pull!" Elias commanded. 3 men pulled the rope with all their strength. They dragged Jack through the water. He reached the side of the ship. He climbed up the cargo net on the side of the wooden hull. His feet scrambled on the wet ropes. The water behind him exploded. A massive shark jumped out of the sea. Its mouth was huge. Rows of sharp, white triangular teeth shone in the sun. The jaws snapped shut with a bone-chilling sound. It missed Jack's foot by only an inch. The beast fell back into the water with a massive crash. Jack fell onto the deck. He rolled over and breathed hard. He shook uncontrollably. He was safe, but only by a second. The shark circled the ship once. It was huge, almost 20 feet long. Its black eyes looked up at the men. Then, it sank back into the deep blue darkness. The crew stood in silence. They looked at the water with fear. They realized that the heat was bad, but the sea was worse. "No more swimming," Elias said quietly. He looked at Jack. "You are a lucky fool. Next time, you stay on the ship." Jack nodded slowly. He did not speak. He just stared at the ocean that almost ate him. The night after the shark attack was quiet. But just before dawn, a sound woke Captain Elias. It was the sound of flapping canvas. He ran to the upper deck. The sails were moving. A fresh breeze blew across his face. It was the sweetest feeling in the world. "All hands on deck!" Elias shouted. "The wind is back!" The crew ran up from below. They cheered loudly. They pulled the ropes with new energy. The Sea Hawk began to move again. The water rushed past the hull. They were free from the silent prison. The ship cut through the waves with speed. The men smiled for the first time in days. Around noon, Sarah stood at the front of the ship. She looked at the water ahead. "Debris in the water," she called out. Elias walked to her side. He looked down. There was wood floating on the waves. It looked like parts of a broken ship. Broken planks and torn sails floated by. "Another ship had bad luck here," Elias said sadly. "Maybe the storm last week destroyed them." Then, he saw something else. A small wooden chest floated on a large piece of wreckage. It was made of dark wood with brass corners. "Get the hook," Elias ordered. "Bring that box aboard." Thomas threw a grappling hook attached to a rope. The metal hook caught the wreckage. They pulled it close to the ship. Thomas reached down and grabbed the handle of the chest. He lifted it onto the deck. It was heavy and wet. Barnacles grew on the bottom. It had been in the water for some time. The crew gathered around. They were curious. "Is it gold?" one sailor asked. "Maybe it is rum," said another. Elias pulled his dagger. He used the sharp point to break the rusty lock. He opened the lid slowly. Inside, there were no gold coins. There was a layer of black velvet cloth. Elias moved the cloth. Underneath lay a round object made of pure gold. It shone brightly in the sun. It was a compass. But it was very strange. It was larger than a normal compass. It had strange symbols on the rim instead of numbers. Elias picked it up. It felt warm in his hand. He looked at the needle. It spun around fast. Then it stopped suddenly. It pointed firmly to the east. Sarah leaned in to look. "This is not a normal compass, Captain," she whispered. "I have heard legends of this. It is the golden compass. It belonged to the old pirate kings. It does not point north." "Where does it point?" Elias asked. "It points to the hidden path," Sarah said. "It leads to the treasure." Elias looked at the map in his pocket. Then he looked at the compass. The needle pointed exactly toward the dangerous waters on the right side of the map. "It is guiding us," Elias said. "We do not need the stars. We follow the needle." He looked at his crew. "Set the course to follow the compass," he ordered. "We go east." The Sea Hawk turned. The ship sailed toward the unknown. Elias held the golden device tight. He felt a strange energy from it. The search for the sunken crown was not just a journey anymore. It was destiny. Captain Elias stood alone on the quarterdeck. The sun was high in the sky, but he did not feel its warmth. His attention was focused entirely on the golden compass in his hand. It was a beautiful object. The gold was etched with strange vines and flowers. The glass cover was thick and clear. But the most amazing part was the needle. It glowed with a faint blue light, even in the daytime. "It is pulling me," Elias whispered. He could feel a small vibration in the metal. It was like the compass had a heartbeat. It wanted to go east. Sarah walked up to him. She looked at the device with suspicion. Sailors are very superstitious people. They believe in ghosts and curses. A magical compass was something that made them nervous. "The crew is talking, Captain," Sarah said quietly. "They say the compass is cursed. They say it belongs to the dead." Elias looked down at the main deck. The men were working, but they looked up at him often. They spoke in low whispers. They pointed at the golden box in his hand. "They are afraid of what they do not understand," Elias said. "But this compass is our only guide. The map from the old man shows the location of the island, but it does not show the safe path through the rocks. This compass knows the way." Sarah looked at the sea ahead. To the east, the water looked darker. The waves were higher and more aggressive. "That is the Forbidden Sea," Sarah said. "My grandfather told me stories about it. He said the water there is full of monsters and storms. He said the fog never lifts." "We are not children listening to bedtime stories," Elias said firmly. "We are the crew of the Sea Hawk. We faced the Navy. We faced sharks. We can face a little fog." He raised his voice so the crew could hear him. "Listen to me." Elias shouted. The men stopped working and looked up. "This compass is not a curse. It is a blessing. It points to the greatest treasure in the world. Do you want to go back to Dead Man's Port with empty pockets? Or do you want to be rich kings?" The men looked at each other. Greed is a powerful feeling. Slowly, they began to nod. Thomas raised his fist in the air. "We follow the captain." Thomas roared, "To the treasure." The other men cheered. Their fear turned into excitement. Elias looked back at the compass. The needle was steady. It pointed straight into the dark horizon. "Helmsman!" Elias ordered. "Turn the wheel." Follow the needle exactly. If it moves left, you move left. Do not question it. The ship turned slowly. The bow of the Sea Hawk pointed east. As soon as they changed course, the air became colder. The wind picked up speed. The sky turned a dull grey color. It felt like they were sailing into a different world. The magic of the compass was leading them, but Elias wondered if it was leading them to gold or to their graves. The air grew colder with every mile the ship traveled east. The bright blue sky slowly turned a dull grey. The sun became a faint white circle behind the clouds. Then, the fog appeared. It was not like normal morning mist. It was a thick, heavy wall of white vapor. It sat on the surface of the water like a solid object. "Here we go," Elias whispered to himself. He stood at the wheel. He buttoned his thick wool coat to keep out the chill. "Steady as she goes." The Sea Hawk sailed into the white wall. Immediately, the world disappeared. The horizon vanished. The sea vanished. Even the front of the ship became hard to see from the helm. It felt like the ship was floating in a bowl of milk. The damp air soaked into their clothes and made their skin feel wet and cold. Sarah walked up the stairs. She held a lantern, but the light did not travel far. The fog swallowed the glow. "I cannot see the bow, Captain," Sarah said. Her voice sounded strange. The fog muffled the sound. It made everything sound quiet and close. "We are sailing blind. If there are rocks ahead, we will not see them until it is too late." Elias looked down at the golden compass in his hand. The blue light from the needle was the brightest thing on the deck. It cut through the gloom. The needle was perfectly still. It pointed straight ahead into the whiteness. "We are not blind," Elias said calmly. "The compass sees the path. Trust it, Sarah." The crew on the main deck was silent. Usually, sailors sing or talk while they work. But in this fog, they were afraid to make noise. It felt like the fog was listening to them. They stood near the railings, peering into the nothingness. Their eyes played tricks on them. Sometimes they thought they saw shapes in the mist. Thomas walked up to the captain. He looked nervous. "The men are scared, Captain," he said in a low voice. "They say they hear voices in the fog. They say the spirits of dead sailors are calling to them." "It is just the wind, Thomas," Elias said firmly. "The wind plays tricks in the rigging. Tell them to keep their ears open for the sound of waves breaking on rocks. That is the only real danger here." Thomas nodded and went back to the men. Elias gripped the wheel tighter. He felt the pressure too. The silence was heavy. It pressed against his ears. The only sound was the soft splashing of water against the hull. Time lost its meaning. Without the sun, they did not know if it was day or night. They sailed for hours in the white void. Elias did not leave the wheel. He followed the glowing blue needle. Suddenly, the compass needle twitched. It moved sharply to the left. Then it moved back to the center. Then to the left again. "Something is changing," Elias whispered. "The magnetic field is shifting." He leaned forward. He strained his eyes to see through the thick cloud. He felt a change in the air. The hair on his arms stood up. They were not alone in this fog. The strange silence of the fog did not last long. Suddenly, a low sound drifted through the heavy white mist. It started as a soft whistle. Then, it grew louder and deeper. It sounded like 1,000 people crying in pain at the same time. The noise echoed from all directions. It was impossible to tell where it came from. The crew on the main deck covered their ears with their hands. Their faces were pale with terror. "It is the sirens," one sailor shouted. "They are singing to lead us to our death." Another man fell to his knees and began to pray loudly. Captain Elias stood firm at the wheel. He listened carefully to the noise. It was a terrible sound, but it was not magic. It was mechanical. It was the sound of air moving through stone. "Stand up!" Elias shouted to his men. "There are no ghosts here. It is the wind." Sarah climbed up to stand next to him. She had to shout to be heard over the screaming noise. "What is it, Captain?" "The loud rocks." Elias yelled back. "The wind blows through holes in the jagged stones. It makes them sing like giant flutes. But the rocks are sharp. If we touch them, the ship will sink." Just then, a dark shape appeared in the fog ahead. It was a massive pillar of black rock. It rose out of the water like a giant tooth. It was only 10 meters away. The ship was heading straight for it. Elias looked at the golden compass. The needle swung hard to the left. It glowed brighter than before. It was screaming a warning in its own silent way. Elias spun the wheel to the left with all his strength. "Hard to port," he screamed. The Sea Hawk turned sharply. The wooden side of the ship missed the black rock by only a few inches. The crew watched the wet, sharp stone pass by. They were so close they could touch it. But there were more rocks. They were everywhere. It was a maze of stone pillars. The fog made it hard to see, but the noise was deafening. The wind howled through the cracks in the stone. It sounded like the rocks were angry. Elias did not look at the sea. He looked only at the compass. Left. Right. Straight. Sharp left again. He danced with the wheel. His hands moved fast. Sweat ran down his face. "Trust the gold," he whispered. "Trust the gold." For 10 terrifying minutes, the ship weaved through the deadly maze. Every time a rock appeared, Elias was ready. The compass knew the path perfectly. Finally, the dark shapes disappeared. The screaming noise faded away behind them. The wind became quiet again. The ship entered a clearing in the fog. The water was calm. They were through. Elias let out a long breath. His arms were shaking from the effort. Sarah looked at him with wide eyes. "That was impossible," she said. "No man could navigate that." Elias rubbed his thumb over the glass of the compass. "No man could," he agreed. "But this little machine did." He looked ahead. The fog was starting to thin out. The grey wall was breaking. But as the view cleared, Elias saw something that made his blood freeze. He was not the only one who survived the rocks. The thick white fog finally disappeared completely. The sun broke through the grey clouds. It shone down on the wet deck of the Sea Hawk. The crew took deep breaths of the fresh, clean air. The terrible screaming noise of the rocks was gone. The ocean was blue and open again. "We made it," Thomas said. He wiped his face with his sleeve. "I thought we were dead men." Captain Elias did not smile. He stood at the stern of the ship. He looked back at the wall of fog they just left. He felt a strange weight in his stomach. The golden compass in his hand was still warm. He put it away in his pocket. "Captain!" Sarah shouted from the upper deck. She was pointing back towards the fog bank. "Look!" Elias looked. A dark shape emerged from the white mist. It was not a rock. It was sharp and pointed. It was the bow of a ship. Black sails appeared next. Then the dark wooden hull. It was the Iron Wolf. The enemy ship sailed out of the fog like a ghost. It was damaged. The sails had holes. The wood was scratched. But it was floating. Captain Vane had followed them through the deadly maze. "How?" Sarah asked in disbelief. "They do not have a magic compass. How did they survive the rocks?" Elias watched the black ship. "Vane is a madman," Elias said quietly. He probably sailed right behind us. He followed our wake. He risked his entire crew just to catch me. The Iron Wolf was close. It was faster than the Seahawk because it had more sails. Elias could see the men on the enemy deck. They were running back and forth. They were loading the cannons. They are preparing to fire. Elias shouted, "Battle stations! Everyone to their posts!" The peaceful moment was over. The crew of the Seahawk stopped resting. They grabbed their swords and pistols. Thomas ran to the cannons on the side of the ship. "Load the powder." Thomas yelled to his team, "Get the iron balls ready." Elias ran to the wheel. He looked at the wind. It was strong. He could not outrun Vane today. The Iron Wolf was too close. They had to fight. "Sarah," Elias said, "take the helm. Keep the ship steady. Do not let them cross our path." Sarah grabbed the wheel. Her face was set in a hard line. "Aye, Captain," she said. Elias drew his sword. He stood at the railing and watched the enemy. He saw a figure in a black coat standing on the bow of the Iron Wolf. It was Vane. He was holding a sword too. He raised it in the air. "Here they come," Elias whispered. The black ship turned slightly. The side of the ship faced the Seahawk. Small wooden doors opened along the hull. Black metal cannons poked out. They looked like dark eyes staring at Elias. The chase was over. The battle was about to begin. The moment of silence ended abruptly. A bright orange flash lit up the side of the Iron Wolf. It was followed immediately by a thick cloud of white smoke. A second later, a massive roar shook the air. It sounded like a thunderstorm was happening right next to them. The enemy ship had fired its first volley of cannons. Elias watched the sky. He saw the black iron balls flying through the air. They looked like small dark birds moving very fast. He held his breath. The cannonballs hit the water around the Seahawk. Great pillars of white water shot up into the air. The water splashed onto the deck, soaking the men. One ball flew right over Elias's head. He felt the wind of it passing. It cut through a rope on the mast behind him. The rope fell to the deck like a dead snake. "They are finding the range." Elias shouted, "Return fire. Show them we have teeth." Thomas stood by the cannons on the starboard side. He held a burning stick called a linstock. He looked at his target. "Steady, men." Thomas yelled, "Wait for the roll of the ship. Fire." Thomas touched the fire to the cannon. The Seahawk shuddered violently as 4 cannons fired at once. The wooden deck jumped under their feet. Smoke filled the air. It smelled of sulfur and burning powder. It was a sharp and stinging smell. Elias looked through the smoke to see the damage. The shots were good. One iron ball hit the side of the Iron Wolf. Wood shattered and flew into the sea. Another ball hit their front sail. It tore a large hole in the black canvas. "Good shot." Elias cheered. "Reload. Do it again." But Vane's crew was fast too. They fired a second time. This time, they did not miss. A heavy ball smashed into the railing of the Seahawk. The wood exploded. Sharp splinters flew across the deck like arrows. A sailor named Bill fell down, holding his arm. He was cut by the flying wood. "Get him below," Sarah ordered. 2 men carried the injured sailor away. The battle was chaotic. The noise was deafening. The 2 ships circled each other like angry sharks. They traded fire back and forth. The air was thick with gray smoke. It was hard to see the sun. Elias ran to the wheel. "Bringing us closer," he yelled to Sarah. "We need to finish this." "Are you crazy?" Sarah shouted back over the noise of the guns. If we get closer, they will board us. That is the plan, Elias said. His eyes were fierce. We cannot win a shooting match. They have more guns. But we have better fighters. We will take the fight to their deck. He spun the wheel hard. The Sea Hawk turned sharply toward the Iron Wolf. The enemy ship loomed large above them. They were so close now that Elias could see the faces of Vane's pirates. They held ropes and swords. They were ready to jump. The two large ships crashed together with a terrible force. The wood groaned and cracked as the hulls rubbed against each other. The impact knocked many men off their feet. But they stood up quickly. There was no time to rest. The air was filled with smoke and the smell of burning rope. Grappling hooks! A voice shouted from the enemy ship. Iron hooks attached to thick ropes flew through the smoke. They landed on the railing of the Sea Hawk. They caught the wood like metal claws. Vane's men pulled the ropes tight. The two ships were locked together in a deadly embrace. They could not separate now. Defend the ship! Elias roared. He stood in the center of the main deck. His silver sword was in his hand. He looked ready for war. Vane's pirates swung across on ropes. They jumped from the high railing of the Iron Wolf down onto the deck of the Sea Hawk. They screamed like wild animals. They wore black coats and red bandanas. They held curved swords and heavy axes. The battle began instantly. It was a chaotic scene. There was no order. It was man against man. The sound of steel hitting steel rang out across the water. It was a sharp and rhythmic noise. A pirate with a long beard attacked Elias. He swung a heavy axe at the captain's head. Elias moved his body to the side quickly. The axe hit the wooden deck. Before the pirate could lift it again, Elias stepped forward. He pushed the man backward with his shoulder. The pirate fell over a coil of rope. Elias turned to face the next enemy. Sarah stood near the wheel. She fired her pistol. A man on the railing fell back into the sea. She did not have time to reload. She grabbed a sword from a fallen sailor. She fought with speed and skill. She was small, but she was faster than the heavy men attacking her. Thomas was a giant in the middle of the fight. He did not use a sword. He held a large wooden belaying pin. It was a heavy club. A pirate tried to stab him, but Thomas hit the man's arm. The pirate dropped his weapon in pain. Thomas grabbed the man by his belt and threw him over the side of the ship. "Get off my ship!" Thomas shouted. The deck was slippery with blood and water. Men slid and fell. It was hard to tell who was winning. The Sea Hawk crew fought bravely to protect their home. But Vane's crew was larger. More and more enemies jumped onto the deck. They were like ants swarming over a piece of sugar. Elias cut through the crowd. He was looking for one man. He scanned the chaos. Then he saw him. Captain Vane stood on the railing of the Iron Wolf. He looked down at the fight with a cold smile. He was not fighting yet. He was watching. Vane's eyes met Elias's eyes. The smile widened. Vane drew his thin, elegant sword. He jumped down onto the deck of the Sea Hawk with grace. He walked calmly through the battle. He walked straight toward Elias. "The time for talking is over, Elias," Vane said smoothly. He pointed his sword at the captain's chest. "Now we dance." The battle raged all around them, but for Elias and Vane, the rest of the world disappeared. They stood in a small circle of empty space on the blood-stained deck. Smoke swirled around their legs. The noise of screaming men and clashing steel faded into a dull roar in the background. They only saw each other. Vane lunged forward suddenly. He was incredibly fast. His thin sword was like a silver snake. It aimed for Elias's heart. Elias reacted on instinct. He raised his heavy cutlass and blocked the strike, The sound was sharp and loud. Sparks flew from the metal. Vane laughed. He stepped back gracefully. "You are slow, Elias," he taunted. "The years have made you heavy." Elias did not speak. He kept his breathing steady. He knew Vane was trying to make him angry. An angry fighter makes mistakes. Elias swung his sword in a wide arc. It was a powerful blow. Vane did not block it. He simply ducked under the blade with a smile. He was playing with Elias. Vane attacked again. The rhythm was deadly fast. Vane's blade was everywhere at once. It cut the sleeve of Elias's coat. Then it scratched his cheek. A thin line of red blood appeared on Elias's face. "Give me the map," Vane hissed. He locked his sword against Elias's hilt. They stood face to face, pushing against each other. "Give me the compass, and I will let your crew live." "You are a liar," Elias gritted out through his teeth. He pushed Vane away with a burst of strength. "You will kill us all anyway." Elias attacked with new fury. He drove Vane backward. They moved across the deck. They stepped over fallen sailors. They moved up the stairs to the quarterdeck. This was the highest part of the ship. The wind was stronger here. The danger was greater. Sarah saw her captain fighting. She tried to run to help him, but 3 of Vane's men blocked her path. She fired her empty pistol at them as a club. She was trapped. Elias was on his own. On the quarterdeck, the fight continued. The 2 ships groaned as they rubbed together. The Sea Hawk lurched suddenly to the right. The deck tilted. Elias lost his balance for a split second. His boot slipped on a wet patch. It was a small mistake, but it was enough. Vane saw the opening. He kicked Elias hard in the chest. Elias flew backward. He hit the wooden railing with a heavy thud. The air left his lungs. His sword fell from his hand and slid across the deck. Elias tried to stand up, but Vane was too quick. The enemy captain stepped forward and pressed the sharp tip of his sword against Elias's throat. "Checkmate," Vane whispered. His eyes were cold and victorious. "Now, hand over the compass, or I will cut your throat and take it from your pocket." Elias looked at the sword. He looked at Vane. He reached slowly into his pocket. His hand closed around the cool metal of the golden compass. He had no weapon. He had no help. He had lost. Elias felt the cold steel of Vane's sword against his neck. He knew he had only 1 second to act. He slowly pulled the golden compass from his coat pocket. The brass shone in the sunlight. The blue needle glowed softly. Vane's eyes widened. He stared at the object with pure hunger. He wanted that compass more than he wanted Elias's life. Elias saw the look in Vane's eyes. He made a dangerous decision. He moved his hand slowly to the side. He held the compass out over the open ocean. The waves churned far below. "If you kill me, my hand will open," Elias said calmly. "The compass will fall into the sea. It will be lost forever." Vane froze. His smile disappeared. "You would not dare," Vane hissed. "You need it to find the crown." "I would rather lose the treasure than let you have it," Elias replied. His hand did not shake. "Back away, Vane, or the ocean gets the gold." Vane hesitated. The tip of his sword lowered slightly. His greed was fighting with his anger. He took a small step back. He reached out his hand. "Give it to me, Elias," he said. "Do not be foolish." "Catch!" Elias shouted suddenly. He threw the heavy golden box high into the air, but he did not throw it to Vane. He threw it over Vane's head, toward the center of the ship. "Sarah!" Elias yelled. Vane's instinct took over. He spun around to watch the prize flying through the air. He forgot about Elias for one crucial second. He reached out as if to grab the distant object. Sarah was fighting two men on the main deck. She heard her name. She looked up. She saw the gold flashing in the sun. She kicked a pirate away and jumped. She caught the compass with both hands. She rolled on the deck and held it tight against her chest. On the quarterdeck, Elias moved. He did not waste the distraction. He grabbed his fallen sword from the floor. He lunged forward. He did not try to kill Vane. He slammed the heavy handle of his sword into Vane's face. Vane yelled in pain. He stumbled backward. Blood poured from his nose. He swung his sword blindly, but Elias was ready. Elias parried the blow and kicked Vane hard in the stomach. Vane fell against the railing. He looked at Elias with hate in his eyes. But he also looked at the main deck. His men were tired. Thomas and the crew were pushing them back. And Sarah had the compass. Retreat! Vane screamed. His voice was filled with rage. Back to the ship. Vane climbed onto the railing. He looked at Elias one last time. "This is not over, Thorn," he spat. Then he jumped across the gap. He landed on the deck of the Iron Wolf. His pirates heard the order. They stopped fighting. They grabbed the ropes and swung back to their own ship. They left their dead and wounded behind. "Cut the lines!" Elias roared. "Cut us loose!" Thomas grabbed an axe. He chopped the grappling ropes that held the two ships together. The ropes snapped with a loud noise. The Sea Hawk drifted away from the Iron Wolf. The wind caught the sails. Elias stood by the rail. He wiped the blood from his cheek. He watched the enemy ship get smaller. They had won the battle. But he knew Vane was right. It was not over. The Iron Wolf became a small black dot on the horizon. It did not follow them. Captain Vane's ship had taken too much damage from the cannon fire to give chase immediately. The Sea Hawk was alone on the ocean again. The battle was won, but there was no cheering. There was no celebration. The deck was quiet. Captain Elias sat on a wooden crate near the wheel. He breathed heavily. His blue coat was torn and stained with blood. His ribs hurt where Vane had kicked him. He felt old and tired. Sarah walked up to him slowly. She held the golden compass in her hands. She offered it to him. "You took a big risk, Elias," she said softly. "What if I had missed the catch?" Elias took the heavy object. His hands were shaking slightly. "I did not think about that," he admitted with a weak smile. "I just knew I could not let Vane have it." He looked around the deck. The cost of the fight was high. The ship was a mess. There were holes in the sails. Ropes were cut. Splinters of wood covered the floor like sawdust. But the human cost was worse. Thomas walked over. He had a bandage wrapped around his left arm. "Report," Elias said. Thomas looked down. His face was sad. "3 men dead, Captain," Thomas said. "And 5 more are hurt. Silas, the traitor, died in his cell when a cannonball hit the hull near the waterline." Elias closed his eyes. "Bury the dead at sea," he ordered quietly. "With full honors. They died protecting this ship." The next hour was somber. The crew wrapped the bodies of their fallen friends in canvas. They said a prayer. They slid them into the deep water. The mood on the ship was heavy. The dream of gold felt less important now. "We must keep moving," Elias said finally. He stood up, ignoring the pain in his chest. "Vane will repair his ship. He will come after us again. We must find the crown before he returns." He looked at the golden compass. The blue light was pulsing now. It was very bright. It looked like a heartbeat. The needle was not pointing east anymore. It was pointing straight ahead. "Look at the water," Sarah said. She pointed over the bow. The ocean around them had changed. It was no longer blue or grey. It was a deep, dark purple. The water looked thick and oily. There were no waves. It was perfectly flat and silent. And in the distance, rising out of the purple water, there were shapes. They looked like broken teeth made of stone. As the ship got closer, Elias realized what they were. They were the tops of ruined towers. They were the highest spires of a city that had sunk beneath the waves thousands of years ago. "The Sunken Kingdom," Elias whispered. "It is real." The compass began to vibrate in his hand. It was pulling him toward the largest ruin in the center. It was a massive stone temple, half covered by the sea. A dark opening, like a giant mouth, sat at the water level. "That is the entrance," Elias said. "Bring us in slowly. The journey ends there." The Sea Hawk glided slowly among the ruins of the ancient city. The purple water was deep and still. Huge stone pillars rose from the depths like the fingers of a drowning giant. Some were broken and jagged. Others were still smooth and covered with strange carvings. Seaweed hung from the stone like green hair. It was a graveyard of a civilization. "It is so quiet," Sarah whispered. She stood next to Elias at the bow. "No birds. No wind. Even the water makes no sound." Elias nodded. He felt the heavy silence pressing against his ears. It was a holy place, or perhaps a cursed one. The golden compass in his hand was vibrating so hard his fingers felt numb. The blue light was blinding now. It pointed straight at the massive temple in the center of the ruins. The temple was a mountain of black stone. Half of it was underwater. A giant archway opened at the water level. It looked like the mouth of a beast waiting to swallow them. The darkness inside was absolute. "Drop the anchor here," Elias ordered softly. "The water is too shallow for the ship inside the arch. We must go by boat." The anchor splashed into the purple water. The sound echoed loudly off the stone walls. It sounded like a gunshot in a church. The crew jumped at the noise. They were all on edge. "Thomas, prepare the longboat," Elias said. "Sarah, gather the weapons and torches. Select 4 strong men to come with us. The rest will stay here and guard the ship." 10 minutes later, the small wooden boat was in the water. Elias sat at the front. He held the compass high. Its blue light cut through the gloom. Sarah and Thomas sat behind him. 4 sailors rowed with muffled oars. They moved toward the dark mouth of the temple. As they passed under the stone arch, the air turned ice cold. The smell of salt and old dust filled their noses. The sunlight disappeared behind them. They were now in the belly of the underworld. The blue light of the compass revealed the walls of a massive cavern. The ceiling was high above, lost in the shadows. The water here was black as ink. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of water falling from the ceiling. "There," Elias pointed. Ahead of them, a stone platform rose out of the water. It was a dock built thousands of years ago. Stairs led up from the water to a pair of gigantic stone doors. The doors were carved with the faces of sea monsters. They looked impossible to open. The boat bumped gently against the stone dock. Elias climbed out first. His boots clicked on the ancient floor. He felt a shiver run down his spine. He was the first living man to stand here in centuries. Sarah and Thomas followed him. They held their torches high. The orange firelight danced on the wet walls. The shadows moved like ghosts. "The door is sealed," Thomas said. He pushed against the massive stone slab with his shoulder. It did not move even a millimeter. "It is solid rock, Captain. We cannot break it." Elias stepped closer to the door. He saw a small, round indentation in the center of the carving. It was the exact size of the golden compass. "We do not need to break it," Elias whispered. "We have the key." He lifted the compass. He took a deep breath. He placed the golden object into the hole in the stone. A loud click echoed through the silent cavern. It was a sharp, mechanical sound. The golden compass spun wildly inside the hole in the stone. Then, it stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. The crew held their breath. Then, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Dust and small pebbles fell from the high ceiling. A deep grinding noise filled the air. It sounded like the earth itself was groaning in pain. The massive stone doors, which had been sealed for centuries, began to move. Slowly, painfully, the heavy slabs slid apart. They scraped against the floor with a deafening roar. A gust of cold, stale air rushed out from the darkness. It smelled of old magic and salt. Elias stepped back and put his hand on his sword. "Stay sharp," he whispered to Thomas and Sarah. "We do not know what is inside." The doors opened fully. A pale blue light spilled out from the chamber beyond. Elias picked up the compass from the slot, it was hot to the touch now, and put it in his pocket. Then, he stepped through the gateway. The room inside was vast. It was a giant circular dome. The walls were covered in glowing blue moss that provided a dim light. In the center of the room was a large, circular pool of black water. Rising from the water was a narrow stone bridge. It led to a small island in the very center. And there, resting on a pedestal of white marble, was the treasure. The sunken crown. It was magnificent. It was made of a dark, ancient gold that looked like twisted vines and coral. 3 massive sapphires were set into the front. They pulsed with a rhythmic light. It was beautiful, but it also looked dangerous. It felt like it was watching them. "There it is," Thomas whispered. His voice echoed in the large room. "We found it." Elias took a step toward the bridge. "I will go," he said. "You two stay here. Watch the water." "Why?" Sarah asked nervously. She looked at the black pool. "Because nothing this valuable is left unguarded," Elias replied. He stepped onto the narrow stone bridge. It was wet and slippery. He walked slowly, placing one foot in front of the other. The silence was heavy. He could hear his own heart beating. He was halfway to the pedestal. The crown was only 10 meters away. Suddenly, the water in the pool began to bubble. It started softly, but soon the water churned violently. Waves crashed against the bridge. Elias stopped and drew his sword. A massive shape rose from the depths. It was a giant serpent. Its scales were as black as the water. Its eyes were glowing yellow. It opened its mouth and hissed. Rows of needle-sharp teeth shone in the blue light. It was the guardian of the deep. The monster rose high above Elias. It blocked the path to the crown. It struck the water with its tail, sending a spray of cold water over the bridge. "Elias! Run!" Sarah screamed from the doorway. She raised her pistol and fired. The bullet hit the serpent's thick scales and bounced off harmlessly. The serpent turned its head toward Sarah. It roared. Then it looked back at Elias. It lunged forward with terrifying speed. The massive head of the serpent crashed down onto the stone bridge. The impact was terrifying. The ancient stone shattered like glass. Rock and dust flew into the air. Elias had rolled forward just a fraction of a second before the strike. He lay on his stomach, gasping for air. He looked back. The bridge behind him was gone. A 10-meter section had crumbled into the black water. He was cut off from his crew. The serpent lifted its head slowly. It shook off the debris. It did not look hurt. Its scales were harder than iron. It turned its glowing yellow eyes back to Elias. It hissed, and the sound was like steam escaping a boiler. It prepared to strike again. This time, there was nowhere for Elias to run. Distract it. Elias screamed to the door. Make noise. Now. Sarah understood immediately. Fire, she ordered the men. Aim for the eyes. The cavern erupted in noise. The sailors fired their muskets. Bang! 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 The loud gunshots echoed wildly off the domed ceiling. The bullets sparked against the serpent's thick hide. One lucky shot hit near the creature's eye. It did not penetrate, but it caused pain. The beast roared in anger. It whipped its head around toward the doorway. It forgot about the small man on the bridge. It wanted to destroy the noisy insects at the entrance. It pulled its body back to lunge at Sarah and Thomas. No. Elias whispered. Do not kill them. But he knew he could not stop the beast with his sword. He had only one chance. The crown. If the legends were true, the crown controlled the sea. Maybe it controlled the guardian too. Elias turned his back on the monster. He looked at the central island. It was still 5 meters away. The bridge between him and the pedestal was cracked and narrow. He had to be fast. He scrambled to his feet. He ran. His boots slipped on the wet stone. He heard the serpent roar behind him. He heard Sarah scream. He did not look back. He focused on the white marble pedestal. The bridge ended abruptly. The last section had fallen away years ago. There was a gap of black water between Elias and the island. It was a long jump. If he missed, he would fall into the pool with the monster. Elias did not slow down. He ran to the edge. He pushed off with all the strength in his legs. He flew through the air. For a second, he hung suspended over the darkness. His chest hit the edge of the island. The air left his lungs with a painful whoosh. His fingers scrabbled against the wet rock. His legs dangled in the water. He felt something cold and slimy brush against his boot. The tail of the serpent. He kicked wildly. He pulled himself up. He clawed at the moss and stone. With a final grunt of effort, he rolled onto the solid ground of the island. He was safe from the water. He stood up and ran to the pedestal. The sunken crown sat there. It hummed with power. The blue light from the sapphires was intense. It felt like the crown was alive. Behind him, the serpent stopped its attack on the crew. It sensed something. It turned its massive body around. It saw Elias standing next to the treasure. It let out a shriek that shook the walls. It dove underwater. It was swimming toward the island. It was coming to finish him. The serpent rose from the black water like a tower of destruction. Its mouth was wide open. Elias could smell the foul breath of the monster. He could see the rows of jagged teeth. It was less than a second away from striking. Elias did not run. There was nowhere to run. He turned to the pedestal. He reached out with both hands. He grabbed the cold, heavy metal of the sunken crown. As soon as his skin touched the gold, a shockwave of energy rushed through his body. It felt like being hit by lightning. His vision turned white for a moment. He heard a voice in his head. It was not a human voice. It was the sound of the ocean, deep, powerful, and ancient. "Master," the voice whispered. Elias lifted the crown high above his head. The 3 blue sapphires flared with a light so bright it illuminated the entire cavern. It was blinding. "Stop!" Elias roared. His voice sounded different. It was louder, deeper. It echoed off the stone walls like thunder. The serpent froze. Its massive jaws were only inches from Elias's face. A drop of saliva fell from a tooth and landed on the stone. The beast hung in the air, trembling. The yellow glow in its eyes faded away. Slowly, the eyes turned a calm, deep blue. The monster did not strike. It slowly lowered its massive head. It did not hiss. It made a low, rumbling sound. It sounded like a cat purring, but much deeper. It lowered its neck until its nose touched the edge of the island. It formed a living bridge across the black water. Sarah and Thomas watched in silence. Their mouths hung open in shock. They lowered their weapons. They could not believe what they were seeing. Elias lowered the crown. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him weak. He looked at the beast. He understood now. The guardian did not attack the owner of the crown. The guardian served him. Elias stepped onto the nose of the serpent. The scales were wet and slippery, but he kept his balance. He walked along the neck of the monster. He walked over the dark water. He reached the broken stone bridge. He stepped onto the platform where his crew waited. Sarah looked at him with wide eyes. She looked at the crown in his hands. "You controlled it," she whispered. "It obeyed you." "The legends are true," Elias said. His voice was tired but filled with awe. "It controls the beasts of the sea." He looked back at the giant snake. "Go," Elias commanded softly. The serpent bowed its head once. Then it slipped silently back into the dark water. The ripples faded. The pool became still again. "We have what we came for," Elias said. He wrapped the crown in a piece of velvet cloth from his pocket. He did not want to touch it for too long. The power was intoxicating. It was dangerous. "We must leave this place. The air is getting thin." They walked back to the stone doors. The heavy slabs were still open. They climbed into the small wooden boat. The rowers were shaking with fear, but they followed orders. As they rowed out of the dark temple and back into the purple light of the sunken city, Elias felt a change. The silence of the ruins was broken. He heard a sound in the distance. It was a sound he knew well. It was the sound of cannons. Elias looked toward the archway. "Vane," he said grimly. "He has returned." The small wooden boat burst out of the dark mouth of the temple. The bright sun blinded the men for a second. But the sound was unmistakable. It was the roar of war. The Sea Hawk was anchored in the middle of the purple lagoon. But she was not alone. The Iron Wolf was there. It had blocked the only exit from the ruins. Captain Vane had positioned his ship perfectly. His cannons were firing at the Sea Hawk. The crew on Elias's ship was fighting back, but they were trapped. They could not move because the anchor was down. They were sitting ducks. "Row!" Elias screamed to his men. "Row until your hearts burst." The 4 sailors pulled the oars with desperate strength. The small boat flew across the water. Elias stood at the front. He waved his sword to signal his crew. "We are coming," he shouted. On the deck of the Iron Wolf, Captain Vane saw them. He stood on the quarterdeck with a spyglass. He smiled a cruel smile. "There he is," Vane whispered. "And he is alive. That means he has the crown." Vane lowered the glass. "Redirect fire," he ordered his gunners. "Target the longboat. Blow them out of the water." The cannons on the Iron Wolf turned. They aimed down at the small wooden boat. Boom! A cannonball splashed into the water 5 meters to the left. A massive wave of water soaked Elias and Sarah. Another ball flew over their heads. The wind of it knocked Thomas's hat off. Sarah yelled to the rowers, "Do not row in a straight line." The men pulled hard on the left oars, then the right. The boat danced on the water. The cannonballs missed, but only by inches. It was a terrifying race against death. They reached the side of the Sea Hawk. Ropes were thrown down instantly. "Climb," Elias ordered. He pushed Sarah up the ladder first. Then Thomas. He was the last one. A musket ball hit the wood right next to his hand. He scrambled up onto the deck just as a cannonball smashed the small boat below into matchsticks. Elias stood on his ship again. He felt the vibration of the battle under his boots. "Raise the anchor," he roared. "Get us moving." Vane's ship moved closer. It was closing the distance. Vane wanted to board them again. He wanted to finish what he started. "Surrender, Elias," Vane shouted across the water. His voice was amplified by a metal trumpet. "You have nowhere to go. The exit is blocked. Give me the crown and I will let your men live." Elias walked to the railing. He held the velvet bundle in his hand. He pulled the cloth away. The sunken crown shone in the sun. The sapphires pulsed with blue fire. Even from a distance, it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever seen. Vane's jaw dropped. His greed paralyzed him for a moment. "It is real," he whispered. "It is mine." "You want it, Vane," Elias shouted. "Come and take it." But Elias did not draw his sword. He looked at the purple water. He looked at the crown. He remembered the power he felt in the temple. He felt the ocean waiting for a command. "Sarah," Elias said quietly, "tell the men to hold on to something solid." "Why?" Sarah asked. She looked at the crown with fear. "Because I am going to wake up the ocean," Elias said. He lifted the crown high above his head. "I am going to bring the storm." Elias stood on the railing of the Sea Hawk like a statue made of stone. He held the sunken crown high above his head with both hands. He closed his eyes and focused his mind. He did not know the magic words. He did not know the spells. He simply poured his anger and his will into the ancient gold. "Rise!" he roared. "Defend your master!" The response was instant and terrifying. The sky above them turned from blue to black in a single second. Thick, heavy clouds swirled over the lagoon. A bolt of purple lightning struck the water between the two ships. The sound was like a bomb exploding. The men on both decks fell to their knees in fear. Then, the water began to boil. The calm purple surface churned violently. Massive bubbles rose from the deep. The Iron Wolf rocked back and forth uncontrollably. Captain Vane held onto a rope to stay standing. His face was pale. "What is this?" Vane screamed. "What are you doing?" Elias did not answer. He opened his eyes. They were glowing with a faint blue light, mirroring the sapphires in the crown. He pointed the crown at the Iron Wolf. The water exploded upward. A massive shape erupted from the depths. It was not just the serpent from the temple. It was something larger. It was a kraken. Huge, slimy tentacles, thick as tree trunks, shot out of the water. They were covered in suckers and barnacles. They reached for Vane's ship. "Fire!" Vane screamed in panic. "Shoot the beast!" The pirates on the Iron Wolf fired their cannons. The iron balls hit the rubbery skin of the monster. But it did not stop. A massive tentacle crashed down onto the deck of the Iron Wolf. It smashed the main mast like a dry twig. Wood shattered. Sails collapsed. Men screamed as they were thrown into the churning sea. Another tentacle wrapped around the hull of the black ship. The sound of crushing wood echoed across the lagoon. The kraken was squeezing the ship. The Iron Wolf groaned in agony. It began to tilt. Elias watched the destruction. He felt a strange mixture of power and horror. He could feel the rage of the monster. It was connected to him. It wanted to destroy everything. He had to be careful. If he lost focus, The beast would attack the Sea Hawk too. "Steer us out," Elias shouted to Sarah. His voice was strained. "Go now, while the beast is busy." Sarah grabbed the wheel. She was shaking, but she did her job. The wind from the magical storm filled their sails. The Sea Hawk leaned to the side and shot forward. They sailed right past the dying Iron Wolf. Elias looked at the enemy ship one last time. He saw Captain Vane standing on the tilted deck. Vane was swinging his sword at a giant tentacle. He was screaming in defiance. Then, the ship tipped over. The black hull vanished under the purple waves. Vane disappeared into the foam. The Sea Hawk raced toward the open sea. The storm raged behind them. The screams of the dying pirates faded away. Elias lowered the crown. The blue light faded. The connection broke. He fell to his knees. He felt weak. His hands were burned red from holding the hot gold. He breathed heavily. Sarah ran to him. She knelt down and touched his shoulder. "It is over, Captain," she whispered. "We are out. We are safe." Elias looked back at the ruins. The water was calming down. The monster had returned to the deep. "The ocean is a terrible weapon," Elias said softly. "We must never use it again." The storm vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The purple clouds dissolved into the air. The sun shone down on the ocean, innocent and bright. It was hard to believe that only an hour ago, a monster had risen from these waters to crush a ship. The sea was empty now. The Iron Wolf was gone. There was no debris. The ocean had swallowed everything. Captain Elias stood in his cabin. He was alone. The door was locked. The sunken crown sat on his wooden table. It was wrapped in the velvet cloth, but Elias could still feel its presence. It seemed to hum with a low vibration. It whispered to his mind. Power, glory, dominion. Elias stared at it. He felt a pull in his chest. He wanted to put it on again. He wanted to feel the rush of energy. He wanted to rule the waves. "No," Elias said aloud. His voice shook. He grabbed a heavy iron chest from the corner of the room. He placed the crown inside. He slammed the lid shut. He locked it with a large padlock. The whispering stopped. The silence returned. Elias sat down on his bunk. He buried his face in his hands. He was trembling. He realized the truth. The crown was not just a treasure. It was a curse. It was too much power for one man. It had destroyed the ancient city. It had destroyed Vane. And if he was not careful, it would destroy him too. A knock came at the door. "Captain." It was Sarah. "Come in," Elias said. He stood up and tried to look strong. Sarah walked in. Thomas was behind her. They looked at the iron chest. Then they looked at Elias. There was a new look in their eyes. It was not just respect anymore. It was fear. "The men are talking," Sarah said quietly. "They are terrified. They say you are a wizard. They say you control the devil." "I saved their lives," Elias said defensively. "Vane would have killed us all." "We know," Thomas said. His voice was deep and sad. "But the price was high, Captain. We saw things today that men should not see. A ship crushed like a toy. A beast from the nightmares." Elias walked to the window. He looked out at the endless blue horizon. "We cannot go back to Dead Man's Port," he said. "If we bring this crown there, every pirate and navy ship in the world will come for us. We will never have peace." "So what do we do?" Sarah asked. "We are rich, but we are fugitives. We have the greatest treasure in history, but we cannot sell it." "We sail west," Elias decided. "To the Forgotten Isles. There are no maps for those islands. We can hide there. We can repair the ship. We can rest." "And the crown?" Thomas asked. He pointed a thick finger at the iron chest. "It stays locked," Elias said firmly. "No one touches it. Not even me. We must decide how to destroy it, or hide it where no one can ever find it again." Sarah and Thomas nodded. They understood. They left the cabin to give the orders. Elias stayed behind. He looked at the iron chest one last time. He felt a strange sadness. He had won the game. He had found the prize. But he felt heavier than before. The adventure was over, but the burden had just begun. The voyage to the Forgotten Isles took 10 days. They were 10 long, silent days. The crew worked quietly. They did not sing shanties. They did not tell jokes. They looked at the captain's cabin with fear. They walked softly on the deck, as if they were afraid to wake a sleeping beast. Inside the cabin, Captain Elias was fighting a different kind of battle. He did not sleep much. When he closed his eyes, he saw blue fire. He saw the giant serpent bowing to him. He heard the voice of the ocean. "You are the king. Take the power. Rule the world." Elias sat at his desk, staring at the iron chest in the corner. The lock was still fast, but the whispering seemed to come right through the metal. It promised him eternal life. It promised him fleets of ships. It promised him revenge on anyone who ever doubted him. Elias poured himself a glass of water. His hands shook so much that he spilled half of it on the map. "Be quiet," he hissed at the box. "Leave me alone." The door opened. Sarah stepped in. She brought a plate of bread and cheese. She saw the spilled water. She saw the dark circles under Elias's eyes. She saw the way he stared at the chest like a starving dog stares at a bone. "You look terrible, Elias," she said bluntly. She put the food down on the table. "You have not eaten in 2 days." "I am not hungry," Elias mumbled. He rubbed his temples. "The headache, it does not go away." Sarah walked over to the chest. She reached out her hand to touch the cold iron. "Do not touch it." Elias shouted. He jumped up and grabbed her wrist. His grip was painful. His eyes were wild. Sarah pulled her hand away. She looked at him with shock. "Elias, you are hurting me." Elias let go immediately. He stepped back. He looked at his own hands with horror. "I am sorry," he whispered. I did not mean to." "It is the crown," Sarah said. Her voice was cold and serious. "It is poisoning your mind. We need to get rid of it, Elias. Soon. Before you become like the mad kings of the stories." "I know," Elias said. He sank back into his chair. He felt weak. "We are almost there." "Land ho!" a voice shouted from the deck. It was Thomas. Elias and Sarah ran outside. The fresh air felt good after the stuffy cabin. On the horizon, a chain of islands appeared. They were green and wild. Thick jungle covered the mountains. White mist hung in the valleys. There were no ports. No smoke from chimneys. No signs of life. "The Forgotten Isles," Elias said. "No maps show this place. No ships come here." "It looks like a graveyard," Thomas said uneasily. He looked at the thick trees that grew right down to the water. "It is perfect," Elias replied. "We will find a cave, deep in the island. We will bury the chest. We will leave it there for eternity." He looked at Sarah. "Prepare a landing party. I want to be off this ship within the hour. I want this thing away from me." Sarah nodded. She looked relieved. But Elias felt a sharp pain in his chest. The voice in his head screamed in protest. Do not hide me. Use me. I am yours. Elias gritted his teeth. He forced himself to look at the island. He had to be strong. Just for a little longer. He had to bury the temptation before it consumed him completely. The longboat scraped against the white sand of the beach. The sound was harsh in the quiet morning. The forgotten isles were beautiful, but they felt empty. There were no birds singing in the trees. There were no crabs scuttling on the sand. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath, afraid of the object that had just arrived. Captain Elias stepped out of the boat. His boots sank into the soft sand. He turned back to the iron chest. "Help me," he muttered to Thomas. Thomas grabbed one handle of the heavy box. Elias grabbed the other. They lifted it together. It was incredibly heavy. Thomas grunted with the effort, sweat already beading on his forehead. But Elias did not feel the weight of the iron. He only felt the heat. The chest felt warm against his leg. It felt like carrying a sleeping animal. "Lead the way," Elias said to Sarah. "Find us a place deep inside. A place that will never be found." Sarah nodded. She pulled a machete from her belt. She walked into the wall of green jungle. She hacked at the thick vines and large leaves. The sound was rhythmic and dull. They walked for an hour. The air in the jungle was hot and wet. It was hard to breathe. Insects buzzed around their faces. Thomas was breathing heavy. "Captain," he gasped. "Can we rest? My arms are burning." "No," Elias snapped. His voice was sharp. "We keep moving." The voice in his head was screaming now. "Why do you listen to him?" The crown whispered. "He is weak. He wants to drop me. He wants to leave me in the dirt. You are a king. Kings do not bury their power." Elias shook his head violently. He tried to shake the voice out. "Shut up," he whispered under his breath. Thomas looked at him with worry. "Did you say something, Captain?" Elias looked at Thomas. For a split second, he did not see his loyal friend. He saw a thief. He saw an enemy. A sudden urge rose in Elias's chest. He wanted to pull his pistol. He wanted to shoot Thomas and take the chest for himself. "Do it," the voice urged. "Kill him. Then the girl. Then you are free." Elias closed his eyes tight. He bit his lip until he tasted blood. The pain brought him back to reality. "Nothing," Elias choked out. "Just keep walking." Sarah stopped ahead of them. She pointed through the trees. "There," she said. "Look." In front of them was a steep cliff face made of grey rock. At the base of the cliff was a small, dark opening. It was a cave. Vines hung over the entrance like a curtain. It looked like a dark, hungry mouth waiting to be fed. "That is the place," Sarah said. "It goes deep into the mountain. We can bury it in the back, seal the entrance with rocks, and let the jungle grow over it." Elias looked at the dark hole. He felt a wave of terror. The crown knew what was happening. It started to vibrate in the box. The iron handle in Elias's hand became scorching hot. It was fighting back. "Let's go," Elias said. He forced his feet to move. Every step toward the cave was a battle. His own body wanted to turn around and run back to the ship. He wanted to put the crown on his head and sail the world. But his heart knew he had to do this. They walked into the darkness of the cave. The air turned cool. The smell of damp earth filled their noses. The final struggle was about to begin. The cave was cold and damp. The light from Sarah's lantern cast long, dancing shadows on the wet stone walls. They walked until the tunnel ended in a small, round chamber. There was nowhere else to go. This was the end of the line. "Here," Sarah said. Her voice echoed in the small space. She took a small folding shovel from her pack. She handed it to Thomas. "Dig deep. We need at least 3 feet." Thomas nodded. He stuck the shovel into the soft earth floor. The sound was loud in the silence. He began to dig. He threw the dirt into a pile behind him. Sarah helped him, using a large flat rock to scoop up the earth. Elias stood near the entrance of the chamber. He was still holding the iron chest. He refused to put it down. The crown was screaming in his mind now. It was not a whisper anymore. It was a roar. "Do not let them do this." The voice shrieked. "They are jealous. They want to bury your greatness. If you put me in the ground, you will be nothing. You will be just a dirty pirate again. Keep me. Use me." Elias's hands trembled violently. He squeezed the handles of the chest so hard his knuckles turned white. Sweat poured down his face, even though the cave was cold. He felt like his head was going to explode. "Captain?" Thomas asked. He stopped digging. He looked at Elias. "Are you all right?" Elias looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked at the hole in the ground. It looked like a grave. "Stop digging," Elias rasped. Sarah froze. She slowly stood up. She wiped the dirt from her hands. "Elias," she said calmly, "put the box in the hole." "No," Elias said. He took a step back. "We made a mistake. We cannot leave it here. It is too valuable. We can use it for good. We can protect people." "It is lying to you," Sarah said. She took a step toward him. "It does not protect. It destroys. Look at Vane. Look at the city. Look at yourself. Stay back." Elias shouted. His hand moved to his belt. In a blur of motion, he drew his pistol. He pointed the heavy barrel straight at Thomas's chest. Thomas's eyes went wide. He dropped the shovel. "Captain." He whispered. "It's me, Thomas. I've sailed with you for 10 years. Shoot him." The crown commanded. "He is the enemy. Pull the trigger." Elias's finger tightened on the trigger. The metal felt cold. The decision was right there. 1 second, 1 movement, and the power would be his forever. Sarah did not run. She did not scream. She walked right in front of the gun. She blocked Thomas with her own body. She looked straight into the barrel. Then she looked up into Elias's eyes. "If you want the crown," Sarah said softly, "you have to kill me first. Do it, Elias. If that gold is worth more than my life, then shoot." Elias stared at her. He saw her face, dirt on her cheek, fear in her eyes, but also love. She was his family. She was his conscience. The image of the king faded. The promise of power shattered. Elias realized he was not a king. He was a man pointing a gun at his best friend. A sob broke from his throat. "I can't," he cried. He dropped the pistol. It hit the floor with a clatter. Then, with a scream of pure agony, he lifted the heavy iron chest. He ran to the hole. He threw it down with all his strength. The voice in his head screamed. The chest hit the bottom of the pit with a heavy thud. Elias fell to his knees. He gasped for air. The screaming in his mind stopped instantly. The silence rushed back in. It was over. Sarah and Thomas did not wait. They grabbed the shovels. They frantically pushed the dirt back into the hole. They covered the iron box. They patted the earth down. They placed heavy rocks on top of the grave. 10 minutes later, there was no sign of the chest, just a rocky floor in a dark cave. Elias sat on the ground, his head in his hands. Sarah sat next to him. She put her arm around his shaking shoulders. "It is gone," she whispered. "You beat it, Elias." Elias looked up. He felt empty, but he also felt light. The heavy burden was gone. "Let's go," he whispered hoarsely. "I want to see the sun." The walk back through the jungle felt different. The air was lighter. The birds, which had been silent before, were singing in the high branches. The heavy, oppressive feeling of the island was gone. It was just an island again. Green trees, blue sky, and white sand. Captain Elias walked out of the tree line and onto the beach. He shielded his eyes against the bright sun. He took a deep breath of the salty air. It tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. He looked at his hands. They were dirty with earth and sweat, but they were steady. The shaking was gone. The voice in his head was silent. Thomas walked beside him. He rubbed his chest where Elias had pointed the pistol. He looked at his captain. "Are we poor now, Captain?" Thomas asked with a small grin. "We sailed all this way. We fought monsters. We buried the greatest treasure in the world." Elias stopped. He looked at the vast blue ocean. He looked at the sea hawk waiting in the bay. He looked at Sarah and Thomas, his loyal friends who had saved his soul. "We are not poor, Thomas," Elias said softly. "We are alive. Vane is at the bottom of the sea. The curse is buried in the mountain. And we have our ship. A man with a ship is never poor." They pushed the longboat into the water. They rowed back to the Sea Hawk in silence. When they climbed aboard, the crew gathered around. They looked at Elias's empty hands. They looked at the empty space where the iron chest used to be. "It is done," Elias announced to the men. His voice was strong and clear. "The crown is gone. We are no longer the keepers of a curse. We are just sailors again." A wave of relief washed over the deck. Shoulders relaxed. Men smiled. They did not want to be rulers of the world. They just wanted to sail. "Raise the anchor." Elias shouted. "Set the mainsail. Let's get away from this place." The crew sprang into action. They moved with energy and joy. The heavy chain rattled as the anchor came up. The white canvas of the sails unfurled and caught the wind. The Sea Hawk turned her bow away from the forgotten isles. Elias stood at the wheel. Sarah stood next to him. She held the old map in her hands. The map that had started it all. The map that led them to the Tavern of Lost Souls, to the rocks, to the temple. "What should I do with this?" Sarah asked. Elias looked at the parchment. He took it from her. He walked to the railing. He tore the map in half. Then he tore it again. He threw the pieces into the wind. They fluttered down into the wake of the ship like white confetti. "We do not need maps anymore," Elias said. "We are off the edge of the world, Sarah. No one knows where we are. The Navy cannot find us. The pirates cannot find us. So where do we go?" Sarah asked. She looked out at the endless horizon. Elias put his hands on the wooden wheel. He felt the vibration of the ship. He felt the wind on his face. He smiled. It was the first real, honest smile he had smiled in weeks. "Anywhere we want," Elias replied. "The ocean is wide, and we have plenty of rum." He spun the wheel. The ship leaned into the turn. The sun was setting in the west, painting the sky in colors of orange and purple. The Sea Hawk sailed straight into the light, leaving the darkness behind them forever.